Hello, my lovely rose garden, and welcome to Writing with Roslyn. Today I'm tackling a pretty serious topic. While I know that not everyone may agree with me on this, I will ask that you please listen to the entire video before commenting. I think that the writing community as a whole would benefit from an open dialogue about it, especially in the ever-developing social media landscape. This video is also not addressing the behavior of any individual, but calling to attention a trend I've seen in online writing circles and asking for an examination and discussion about that trend. I'm sure this isn't a new attitude by any means, but with the advent of social media and creators having more and more direct interaction with fans and fandom spaces centered around their works, I think it's worth addressing. So without any further dramatic build-up, the trend is control of fandom spaces, or rather, attempting to control fandom spaces. More than ever, writers are involved in fandom spaces. Many young authors grew up in fandom spaces reading and writing fanfiction. It seems only natural that they would then in turn be prominent figures in their own fandoms. I mean, how many of us fantasized about our favorite authors secretly being part of our fandom spaces? How many of us dreamed of the kinds of interactions we'd have with fans once we made it big, especially now that social media sites like Twitter and Tumblr have made that easier than ever? It sounds awesome, and I'd be lying if I said I don't cherish receiving messages from fans about how my books helped them or inspired them, or even long rambling messages about their favorite characters or scenes. Those are fantastic, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. But here's the thing. There is a difference between a fan sending a piece of fan art to the official email address I have listed on my site, and me seeking out interaction with my fans in an informal setting. And as social media blurs the line between professional and personal spaces, I think it's important that we writers, especially those of us pursuing independent publishing, remember this. Fandom spaces are not for us. Fandom spaces are for the fans. So what does that mean? As a writer who once daydreamed about fan interactions and who has done my fair share of promoting fan art of my works, it means accepting a rather hard fact about the nature of content creation. That once I write my books and publish them, they don't really belong to me anymore. For better or worse, people are going to interpret and interact with media their own way, even in ways that outright contradict the author's intended interpretation. People are going to come up with their own ideas based on their own experiences and media preferences that the creator has absolutely no control over. People are going to do what they want with the story. I understand that for a lot of authors, that's a scary thought. After all, you've poured countless hours of work into your story. You very likely wrote it with a specific interpretation in mind, and when people interpret it differently, it may leave you wondering where you went wrong. The idea that people might create fan content that goes against what you wanted the story to be can be very upsetting, especially if that involves triggering content or pairing characters that you would never ever want to be together. And this is where the trend comes in. I have seen several different writers across multiple platforms express a degree of concern over the potential actions of their fan bases. Some of it has been mild, like one-off comments about how they hope no one ships character X with character Y, to reactions as extreme as threatening to issue takedown notices for fanfics that ship a certain pairing or use a certain trope the author doesn't like. And I think this level of involvement in one's own fanbase is not good. Because, like I said earlier, the fandom space is not for us, it's for the fans. The fact of the matter is, the original content creator has a certain degree of power in any fandom space based around their works that the fans do not. Anything they say or do in that fandom space can influence how the fandom as a whole perceives the work and how fans with different ideas are treated. Words have to be chosen carefully when a content creator interacts with their fandom, and I don't think silencing any fan, even one with ideas or ships the creator doesn't like, will lead to anything good in the long run. History has shown time and time again that the more a creator tries to exert control over their audience, the worse they are received. I know everyone's probably tired of this example, but it stands as one of the strongest and most recognizable I can give. Anne Rice's legal crusade against fan works of her Vampire Chronicles series, especially works depicting the characters as homosexual. For those not aware of this, yes, author Anne Rice had an honest-to-God legal team that spent their time taking down fanfiction of her books as a means to fight any interpretation of the characters that Anne Rice didn't approve of. Prior to the last 2 decades or so, a lot of authors had a very contentious relationship with fanfiction, and many of those authors viewed fanfiction as either people trying to wrongfully profit off their intellectual property, or ungrateful fans daring to reinterpret their stories in non-canonical ways. There was once a time when it was actually a risk to post fanfiction online, and legal takedown notices were issued to fanfiction authors. It took a lot of time and a lot of hard work to create spaces where people can post their fan stories freely without worrying about being harassed by copyright lawyers. I am definitely not accusing anyone in the modern writing community of being like Anne Rice if they feel a bit uncomfortable about people interpreting their works differently. It's okay to be squeaked out by certain ideas. What I am saying is that it is impossible to control what fan content people will create, and trying to do so leads to negative results for everyone involved. While I don't necessarily think it's possible to 100% separate an author's intent from their work, readers view the story through the lens of their own personal experience, and that shapes how they relate to certain characters, how they interpret certain messages, and what they ultimately want to see happen in the story. They engage with it their own way, just like you engage with the books you read or the movies you watch your own way. And I will say again, this is kind of a hard thing to deal with as a content creator. I wrote my story the way I wanted to tell it. I wrote my characters the way I did for a reason. But that doesn't mean that no one else is allowed to imagine these characters in different scenarios, including those that are dark or uncomfortable to me personally. So, how do I think writers can deal with fandom spaces, especially when there are headcanons or ships in those spaces that they don't agree with? Personally, I first acknowledge that there are things I can control and things I can't. I tell myself, out loud if needed, that I cannot control how other people view my work, and I am not responsible for their interpretation. Then I try to focus on the things I can control. I write my books the way I want to write them because that is something I control. I set firm boundaries for myself and with fans, and I block certain tags when dealing with fan content so I don't have to interact with the things that make me uncomfortable. Those are things I can control for my well-being. I am not obligated to interact with every piece of fan art I receive. If I do not want to see readers discussing a certain pairing, I don't have to. That may be the extent of my control, but it is something I have full control over, and I exercise that to whatever degree I need. The point I'm trying to make here, because I want to be explicitly clear on this, is that you do not have to enjoy or agree with every single interpretation of your work. It is okay if you do not want to see a certain ship, or a U idea, or anything else you wouldn't want to see in any other fan community when it comes to your work. You should not have to see or interact with fan content that makes you uncomfortable. I would hope that people are courteous enough to tag their works for the benefit of everyone in the fandom space who doesn't want to see certain things. When authors are talking about how they don't even want to post their work due to fears that someone might ship two characters, or might interpret their story in a way they didn't intend, or again, threaten legal action over fanfiction that squicks them out, I think it's gone a little far at that point and is actively harming both the writing community and the fan communities. And yes, these are things I have seen people say online. And whether or not they would actually harass their fanbase over the content they create, the fact remains that they have received support for these ideas from a decent chunk of the community, and that can lead to a fanbase becoming toxic. The internet is a big, scary place full of things that you might not want to see, and I can completely understand the fear of a portion of your own audience and content falling into that squick category. It's okay to be uncomfortable, to block certain content or creators, to do what you need to do in order to curate your personal online experience. What's not okay is dictating how people are allowed to interpret your content and harassing those who disagree. It is common advice in the writing community that authors not engage with reviews of their works on sites like Goodreads, Amazon, etc., because those are for the readers, not the author. When a book receives a negative review or a review that includes some form of criticism, authors are usually advised to not respond, with the only true exception being cases of direct and deliberate harassment. I don't see why the same shouldn't hold true for fan content. You don't have to like or agree with all the content your audience produces, but trying to force them to only make the content you're comfortable with is never going to work and will only cause you a lot more stress and suffering. Whew. Sorry, I know that was a lot, but as someone who's struggled with issues like this for a long time, it was something I needed to get off my chest. I don't want the online writing community, particularly the indie community, to become a place where people are so afraid of the things they can't control that they stop creating altogether. That goes for both the authors themselves and their fan bases. I know how hard that can be to deal with, but thankfully the techniques my therapist taught me help me a lot when it comes to calming my fears and anxieties around fan content. I understand this can be a complicated topic, and I would like to hear your thoughts on it. What do you do to help make your online fandom experience more comfortable? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, I would really appreciate it if you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like it, and check out the links to my bookstore, Patreon, and social media in the description. Till next time, Rose Garden.